This is the lesson on creating virtual apps, vApps, and removing virtual machines. After this lesson, you should be able to describe a vSphere vApp. You should be able to build a vApp and use the vApp to manage virtual machines. Finally, we'll look at removing virtual machines from vCenter inventory, as well as deleting a virtual machine from disk altogether. A vApp is a nice utility or container that vSphere provides to us. And what it allows us to do is actually take multiple virtual machines and lump them together into a single container. Now, you may recall we can use folders to organize and contain virtual machines. And in a subsequent lecture, you'll find out about resource pools that you can also use to manage and group virtual machines. But the difference with a vApp is that the vApp actually has similar properties to a virtual machine in that you can actually power on a vApp, power off a vApp, suspend, you can clone, and you can actually even package the vApps into deployable appliances. So all of those features that apply to virtual machines actually can apply to the vApp itself. So what's nice about that is you can actually take a group of virtual machines that may be dedicated to a specific function or a specific department, and you can create a vApp with all these virtual machines in it and power them on all as one, or even package them up as a turnkey solution and ship them off to another location. Or if you're a third party actually selling products, you can package up your entire system. You may have a database server, a web server, and maybe some other components, and you could actually just build those out ahead of time, put them as a vApp, and then you could roll that whole thing up as an OVA or an OVF, an appliance, and you can ship that off to your customer and have them deploy it that way. If you're using the vApps for yourself, like in this particular example, if we just look at the finance one, you see they have two application servers, a database server, and then a couple domain controllers. And so you could just click on the finance vApp there, the first one you see, power that on, and it'll power all of those machines within it, bring them all online. And you can actually set, we'll see in the next slide, that you can actually set, you can stagger the time, how they're powered on. And so maybe in this case, we want the domain controller to come online first. So you could set it up so that when you power on finance, the very first thing that happens is that fin-dc-01, which we're assuming is their domain controller, their primary domain controller, would come online. And then you could set a timer that maybe 45 seconds, a minute or so later, the next one starts coming online. So maybe after the primary domain controller comes online, then you want to bring your database server online. And your database server may be using Active Directory credentials, so obviously you want to make sure your domain controller is up and running and all the services are there waiting for it. So then the database server comes online, and then maybe you want to wait another minute or so until the database server is up and running. Then you can start launching your application servers, because once the app servers come online, they're going to want to access the database server. And then finally, at the end, you might want to bring your secondary domain controller online. And so you can put times between all of those and kind of link them together. And then same thing, when you shut them down, you can have them shut down in reverse order. And when you go to actually go through the wizard of creating a vApp, or in this case, if we're just editing the vApp settings, you can see there's a couple different groups there. And this is what I was talking about as far as the actions and how you want them to sequence the actions. So in this case, we have two different groups. We have Labo1-3 is in group 1, and that one's going to, at power on, you'll see that it's going to power on, and then it will wait 120 seconds in this case. So after the startup sequence, the power's on, and then 120 seconds later, it's going to move on to the next thing, which would be group 2. And if you clicked on the group 2, you'd see the similar option for that. And then you could just sequence that all the way through. The other thing that vApps allow you to do is similar to virtual machines. You can set up CPU and memory allocations for the entire vApp and kind of distribute those across the virtual machines that are within that group. Similar to how you'll see a resource pool, but it's, again, you're having the characteristics of a virtual machine to be able to power on, power off, and all those kinds of things. IP policies, you can set up different IP ranges that would be allowed to be assigned for those virtual machines within that particular group. And then there's another group of other advanced settings similar to what you can do with virtual machines themselves. And then finally, let's look at removing a virtual machine. So that was virtual apps. Now, how do you remove a virtual machine? This is kind of just stuff here in this lecture because it's really not much to it. And this is kind of the wrap up here of this particular module in managing and maintaining virtual machines. So just briefly, we'll run through this. There's two different ways that you can remove a virtual machine. There's removing it from inventory. And when you remove it from inventory, it just unregisters it from the vSphere environment or from the ESXi host, but it still remains on disk. So the first part is just removing from inventory. If you right click on any virtual machine and then you go down that dialog box there, or that context menu there, you go down to the bottom where it says remove from inventory or delete from disk. If you select remove from inventory, it unregisters that virtual machine from the ESXi host and from the vCenter server. You'll notice on the screen right now there's actually a typo in this slide. It says this type of removal registers the virtual machine. That should be unregisters. So it unregisters it from the environment, but the machine files, the virtual machine files, still remain on disk. And you could actually just browse the data store and re-add those to inventory or re-register them at a later date without affecting the machine. You just re-register them, power the machine back on, and you can be off and running again. On the other side, if you delete the virtual machine, it deletes it altogether. So that would unregister the virtual machine from your environment, and it would also permanently delete those files off of the disk. So there's no recovering from that. So now hopefully you can describe a vApp, hopefully you can build a vApp, and understand how to use vApps to manage virtual machines. We also talked briefly about removing virtual machine from vCenter server and from ESXi, and then also deleting a virtual machine completely from disk.